Thanks everyone for coming tonight, or this evening, I suppose. By way of beginning, I want to say how pleased I am to see everyone here. I want to take a minute to tell you about me, a tiny bit about the center that has brought you here, and then make a few reflections on some of the changes underway and the realities of migrant trajectories in Canada. So my name is Jenna Hennebry, and I'm one of the co-founders of the International Migration Research Centre here at Laurier University with my colleague, Dr. Margaret Walton-Roberts, who is here somewhere. I'm also a faculty member in the Balsillie School of International Affairs, and I've also had the great privilege of working with a team of excellent researchers and community partners through the BMRC Building Migrant Resilience in, oh, I did it wrong. Sorry, in BMRC, a group of researchers from York University working on a large project around migrant resilience in Canada, led by Dr. Valerie Preston. So we've been here today having quite an elaborate conversation about these issues. So this is the tail end of the day for a lot of people, so they're a tiny bit drained, myself included, as you can tell. And it's been a really fruitful day of discussion around some of the ways in which migrants and communities need to cope with change and challenge and stress, and how they do so. And so that's part of why we wanted to bring people here together tonight, was to discuss that with a little bit of a showcase of what's been happening in Kitchener-Waterloo. The reality is, or the title of tonight's discussion is Building Resilient Communities and Responding to the New Realities of Newcomer Trajectories in Canadian Cities. Nice and long, but really what it means is the way in which people are coming to Canada, settling in Canada, spending time in Canada, working, living, and belonging in Canada have substantively changed. And what's changed has been increasing different pathways, a whole variety of ways in which people now come into the country. And we have a system that's designed and predicated on earlier models in terms of responding to that. And there's been some major shifts over the last decade in terms of responding to those changes, but certainly in more recent decades, there's been more attention being drawn to the issues about how better to respond to this changing landscape. Because the truth is, the landscape, the policy landscape, and the reality of migration flows in Canada have significantly changed. We know that there's more temporary and two-step migration, which is now part of the kind of normal picture of Canadian migrant trajectories, and cities are now finding new ways of responding to these realities. We know that in a given year, there's more than 350,000 people in Canada with a temporary status, as students, as skilled workers, as caregivers, asylum seekers. In fact, we know between 2010 and 2013, Canada admitted 385,000 international students, or roughly 96,000 per year. Not only are there more people in Canada with temporary status, so that means that people didn't come with a permanent residency upon arrival. There's more people in Canada with that temporary status, and more people are staying longer than in previous years. And we know, for example, many want to stay much longer after that. And the tendency to stay longer has increased among the more recent arrivals. And what we see is increasing use of the temporary foreign worker program as the sort of first stage of which people arrive in Canada, work in Canada, and then apply from and get status in Canada. We know that sort of recent statistics tell us that between 40 and 50% of applicants for permanent residency have come from within Canada in a given year. We also know that not only are temporary foreign workers and those in other temporary statuses staying longer, Many are trying to transition into permanent residency. And actually, this is not terribly surprising. We know that by the Canadian Bureau of International Education survey in 2018, for example, found that 68% of international students plan to apply for permanent residency, and 65% planned to stay to work after graduation. So all of this context at the Canadian level, we know translates down into the Kitchener-Waterloo level as well. We have 2 universities and a college, we have a highly skilled sector, we have an IT sector, and we have significant numbers of international students and highly skilled temporary migrants and migrants in a variety of different categories. We have at least 20,000 in a given year in that whole package of categories. And we have a choice. Cities such as Kitchener-Waterloo that are middle, or sort of what we would call sort of second-tier cities, are responding and finding a new path, and paths that are different maybe than in what is happening in some of the larger cities. We have a choice that comes from the flexibility and advantage of our size and our approach to our community. We have a choice whether to welcome these residents as part of the fabric of our community, whether or not they're here for 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, or eventually transition into permanent residency or not. We have also a choice to figure out how to cope with the new pathways and trajectories that migrants take to come and settle and become part of Canadian society. Because we can be resilient as a community, and we can, by our own resilience as a community, we are supporting the resilience of newcomers within our community. So tonight, I was hopeful that we would have a bit of a dialogue about some of these issues from some people that have been working very hard with community members as they respond to these types of changes. And these are only some of the types of changes. There's been some others that have obviously been widely publicized. For example, the resettlement of significant numbers of Syrian refugees in the community was a pretty significant moment. But these individuals that are up here today represent people that have worked and engaged with a whole range of community members. First, I'm going to turn it over to Tara Bedard, who is the chair of our local immigration partnership, to lead the panel discussion this evening. Followed by that, we'll have some questions from the audience, and then we'll be lucky enough to have closing remarks by my colleague from York University, Dr. Valerie Preston. So, Tara, go ahead.
Thanks, Jenna. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Balsillie School. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of the Waterloo Region Immigration Partnership. For those of you who do not know what a local immigration partnership is, it's a program that is funded primarily by the federal government and is in place in communities across Canada as a community-based or place-based response to facilitating successful immigrant settlement in communities across Canada. By working with service organizations, be they settlement service providers or other community service organizations, reaching out and building bridges into the business community and with employers for us in Waterloo Region, engaging with our municipalities about their thinking around immigration in the community and what they are doing to foster a welcoming environment that people would like to stay in and build a life in. And working with individual community members kind of across the community. How do we be a better community for the newcomers who have chosen Waterloo Region? And so the topic of resilience when it comes to migration is really important to the work that we are doing from the perspective of when we are working with our partners across the community. How is their work helping to facilitate resilience amongst newcomers, and how are we as a system of services and businesses and others that make up a community, being resilient to the changing circumstances in our community when it comes to migration. And so in working with the International Migration Research Center here in KW, looking at this topic, looking forward to hearing from our panelists who represent a number of different types of organizations and institutions in Waterloo region, and then hearing from others in the room who are also from this region and from our colleagues across the rest of the BMRC network, that spans from kind of Montreal and Sherbrooke to Toronto and York and Windsor and London and Ottawa. What can we learn from each other across communities? I think I'll first ask the panelists up here to introduce themselves, and then I will kind of introduce the questions that we have given to them to frame their thinking and their comments for you tonight, and then kind of open it up for a broader discussion. So maybe Frances, can you first introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tara. My name's Frances Hannigan. I'm a registered immigration consultant. I have been for the last 10 years. I've been doing immigration for 15 years, so I got my certification just as the regulation came on board that you had to be registered, otherwise you couldn't advise. I work for the University of Waterloo. I am a senior immigration consultant within the university's Legal and Immigration Services Office. I basically advise the university as an employer on all matters with regards to hiring, inviting, and providing visitors to come to Canada as for immigration, but I also advise the faculty, staff, students, and visitors that have an affiliation with the university on their immigration with regards to temporary status, permanent status, and then citizenship. So it's a full-line service board, basically.
Rana?
Hi everyone, my name is Rana, and I have a PhD in public health from University of Waterloo, and I'm specialized in public health and nutrition, and particularly dealing with Arab immigrants in Southern Ontario. I'm also board of director in Arab Women of Waterloo region. It's a non-profit organization, but it's still registered, established to help Arab newcomer in their settlement and provided all help to ease their homesickness and challenges. Thank you.
Candice?
Okay. My name is Candice Stewart-Smith, and I'm the International Student Academic Transition Advisor at Laurier International, so at Wilfrid Laurier University. I've been in this role for the past 5 years, but I have experience from another university institution. My role is to provide support for international students and sponsored refugee students. So that can be academic transition, settlement, immigration, sociocultural. It's a role that I really enjoy. I have really great coworkers who are there to support all our international students.
Thank you. Ana Luz?
Okay, my name is Ana Luz Martinez from Kitchener-Waterloo Multicultural Centre. I'm the settlement manager, and I have been there for 15 years in the settlement sector. At the center, we provide support to newcomers, refugees, people who have been here for a long time that have become Canadian citizens and are still in need of settlement support. We also have an employment department, and we have the other one that I feel that is quite important, that is the interpretation and translation department as well. And besides that, we have some different programs with the idea to support, I hope, everybody who comes in the community. And we work with, as I said, all category of people coming, trying to settle in here in Kitchener-Waterloo.
Great. And so just in terms of setting the context a little bit for some of the comments that we'll hear from our panelists, some of the questions that we asked them to reflect on for the discussion this evening were around how they, from their different perspectives, see Kitchener-Waterloo's most significant challenges related to migration, what have been or what are the main issues, challenges, and crises that the region has had to respond to. What has the region or your organizations done to respond to those challenges? What has worked and what has not? And how does your organization respond to shifting policies, shifting migration flows, et cetera? Within the parameters of the project that we are here in the context of tonight, what is needed to foster resilience amongst newcomers from your perspectives? And how is your organization supporting resilience amongst newcomers in Kitchener-Waterloo? And what is better needed to support the resilience of newcomers and the organizations that support them in the years to come? So, big topics, lots of areas for comments. So, I don't know if you'd like to just go down the line, or how would you like to start tonight?
I could start, go for it. Okay, so about 15 years ago when I first started doing immigration for the University of Waterloo, the clientele, and I say clientele loosely in the sense that my clients involved the university as an employer, the faculty that came on board, the students that were here as international students, and staff as well that may have come on board with a faculty or a student, because they are here to accompany their spouse or partner. 15 years ago, my clientele was very little. The reason for that was just simply because there weren't so many, I guess, hills to overcome when it comes to immigration. All that everybody worried about was, submitting that application. There wasn't that fear that it may be denied because there weren't that many actually coming to Canada on a temporary basis at that point. The majority of people were applying from abroad for permanent residency, then coming to Canada before they even thought about, going to school here, working here. So back then, the numbers were small. As the years progressed, and I've seen it grow, now my role is 100% focused on immigration advising and guidance for everybody under the sun, it seems. Because the landscape of immigration has changed so much and has changed often enough that it has forced a lot of people, and we're talking about international people that aren't familiar with our jargon, aren't familiar with our websites, our government, how it works. They're forcing them to seek external counsel or external guidance, advising, however you want to call it, to help them navigate and understand how best they could come to Canada, to start that process to be part of Canada. So as the years go by, a lot of people are asking those questions now. How do I come here? What do I need to do to ensure that I am able to come? And once I'm here, how do I stay? What is the process of moving forward to move on beyond temporary status but become a permanent resident? Then beyond that, to become a citizen. So I think with that said, the universities, and I'm not just talking about University of Waterloo, a lot of the other academic institutions have taken it on too, where they've become more holistic in the kinds of services that they provide. Not just in immigration, but the other services, because essentially an academic institution is a micro-community unto itself. As a micro-community, we are providing not just services to teach for research, but we're providing services on things like where do you go for banking? Where do you get your SIN when you arrive? All of those things are provided by our own human resources, by our own international student advisors. So I think as a micro-community, we have kind of helped build in that resilience within our own community, but not outside and off of campus. But with that said, it's a first step to helping our students, our faculty, our staff that are new to Canada to find their footing, to get some of those services that they normally cannot find out in the community. And it's not because we don't have those services in our communities, it's because they don't have the funding to provide it to those temporary people that are here on a temporary status. They have funding to support those that are here permanently. So there is a huge gap in that I think as academic institutions we have taken up to help fill that gap a little. but there's a long way for us to still kind of go to help these newcomers, to help them give them that flexibility, not just the resilience to survive here in our communities.
So I would like to start talking about challenges and link these challenges to barriers that's with respect to new immigrants in our area. I would like to mention the 4 barriers. Language barriers, as we know, many of newcomers came with a beginner level of English, or a non-speaker English as a refugee. So those people have been facing many challenges in our community, and to be like integrated or communicate with their new environment contact. From my own experience on the area of the public health, I know there is many new immigrants, they have problem to communicate well with their health sector, or they have a problem to, or they have an issue with the understanding or missing of the health quality or tools in the area. Also, I would mention education and qualification. All we know as immigration and protection, immigration and refugee protection program launched a new program in 2002 based for accepting new immigrants based on their own skills, which permitted only for high education individual who has only have or has high education degree to be qualified to apply for immigration. So here we have another problem. That's when they came to Canada, they facing another reality. That's no Canadian does not allow them to work. Or not giving them work unless they qualified or destination their certificate to be qualified to Canadian system. So also what's our organization, how our organization, Arab of Women in Waterloo region, help them or help Arab newcomer in the area. So we are working as a platform for Arab women and girls to go through their barriers, such we have economic development support program. We having a social development support program for them, and settlement and well-being support in the community. To support them, how the let's say how the other organization could support the newcomers. I would say maybe secure long-term funds from loan funders and sponsorship, or help them to resettlement and finding a new or good residency place with a minimum insurance or 2 months of payment. For rent payment. Also give them more financial aids to overcome high living expenses. We also thinking about facilitate credit. Maybe it's good to facilitate a credit card with a zero history, or educate them about the Canadian culture. Give them a license or workshop in the language that they understand. For example, for safety. For parenting, violence, government rules, health rules, gender issue, and finally, from the area that I'm really good at it, and I would also to mention it because it's a part of my thesis. That's a researcher that's found that a newcomer to Canada experience a range of barriers to quality health care, such as complex health insurance, eligibility and right rules, limited pre-arrival health care, lack of familiarity with the Canadian healthcare system. Also, there is other issue that's related to gender and culture. Thank you.
So when I got the notice about this, I was told I had 8 to 10 minutes of talking time. And so I'm going to be using most of those, so please bear with me. Okay. So at Laurier International, we provide a range of supports for international students and sponsored refugee students. Our approximately 1,600 students hail from over 80 different countries to further their studies. International students are recruited by our educational institutions to not only gain Canadian education, but also to become an integral addition to our region. Although, as Francis had mentioned, our internal university community consists of almost any resource you can think that a student may need during their academic journey or a newcomer may need to survive and make it through their 4 years at university, there's so many more resources in the wider community that students should access in order to feel welcome and settled in their new home. International students, like any other newcomer in our society, face the same challenges of homesickness, cultural adaptation, discrimination, which could be very different from what they may experience on campus, and the list goes on. Settlement workers are specialized in preparing newcomers for such an experience, but alas, again, as Francis had mentioned, government funding usually restricts the support that international students can receive. But it's great to hear from Anna Luz that the multicultural centers will see any of your, depending on your status. Thank you. The pathway for students to immigrate permanently to Canada has certainly become easier. Jenna had mentioned the statistic from the Canadian Bureau International of Education that at least 2/3 of international students plan to make Canada their permanent home, mostly via the Canadian Experience class economic immigration stream. It's with the hope that these international students who are considered potential immigrants be provided with the supports that they need most. Students who feel welcome and settled in the KW region, given the opportunity to secure employment, would certainly reconsider cutting their ties with our community in the search for employment elsewhere. What an easy way to retain the diversity of ethnicity, culture, language, and thought in our own region. And I apologize to those of you who may be from other regions, but we want to keep our superstars. Okay, so my specific story is that I came as an international student to Canada and received my permanent resident status about 10 years later. During that time, I relied on my institution and my personal resilience to settle and thrive in Canada. After 10 years, I no longer required the services that was certainly now available to me. And when they called me or came knocking on my door, I didn't have to respond because I was already settled in Canada. So my dream is that no matter which door is knocked on, an international student will not have the door closed on them due to bureaucracy. Fortunately, our local immigration partnership has involved the educational institutions in the area in their planning of what the region should look like for all newcomers regardless of status. We sit on council and working groups that allow us to discuss and work on implementing best practices community-wide. Through this work, the Immigration Partnership has realized the specific contributions of international students in this game of migration, and is in the process of creating a subcommittee to further discuss integration of international students in our community. Shifting now to fostering resilience in international students, I believe that the choice that a student makes to leave their comfort zone behind and venture into the unknown to further their education already shows the strength of our international student community. With that said, there are those who may find the new way of life not as easy as originally perceived. There are 3 points, in my opinion, that are important to consider when the aim is to build or develop resilience. So the first is that the necessary resources to enter, transition, settle, and thrive must be available for those who are making the journey. We need to constantly reevaluate this as we can continue to offer services, but if we're not reaching the students where they are, then they would not get the tools that are required to make it. The second point would be to bring awareness and understanding of the resources that are provided, because we may have the right services at the right time, but these perfect offerings may be underutilized if the existence is unknown. And last, we need to instill an attitude of seeking support when required. Some students, or some newcomers in general, come from cultures that impress upon them to tough it out. Sadly, we sometimes only see these students when it is too late. So from pre-arrival to post-arrival, we provide students with the resources that they need the most. We use a variety of methods, such as email, social media, video chats, working with student mentors to introduce these resources. Upon arrival, we provide an orientation program to get students acclimatized to their new home, while also providing the resources that they require at that specific moment in time. We also take time to light that fire about seeking resources at the time when it's necessary. So our orientation offerings are presented in various ways, so formal presentations, videos, games, breakout groups, etc. During their studies, we proactively reach out to students who face various challenges, mainly academic and financial, as this is the information we have access to. We utilize strategic time points during the academic year when those students will make that decision that they actually do need this help. We meet with those students at their lowest and work with them to create an action plan that will help them out of the adversities that they face. They now have a non-judgmental, understanding, and skilled resource to turn to, who will work with them until they are back on track and even beyond. And we love the referrals that come once students have a positive experience with our service. So some of the ways that we support our international students in becoming resilient, we have a program called Transition Advising, where we meet students who are at academic risk, and we work again with developing a plan that would include resources that are on or off campus. This year, we have awarded 24 students with an academic improvement scholarship. So these are students who were previously at risk, and they significantly increased their grades. And so we acknowledge not only their academic success, but the resilience or that grit that kept them going even when they didn't think that they had it in them. Immigration related, so Bill C-35 allowed our advisors to become certified in immigration consulting. So we have been working with students who find themselves in precarious situations, such as being out of status or having denied immigration documents. Financial, so we advocate with our financial services, our registrar's office, when students face those political or transnational or even diplomatic issues, and we help them to continue their studies until they get the money that will fund their tuition. And regarding wellness, so I think we have made such a quite open office and a space where students now feel comfortable to come and disclose to us that they're not feeling well, right? And so they're thinking that maybe they're very depressed, and so we have a conversation with them. We're not the experts, so we provide the resources that are there for them. So it's really good to see that more students are coming to disclose this to us, and so they're not shy or not hiding or not coming when it's too late. And for our upcoming support, we're having a position in summer 2019. So Laurier International will add a team member who will support students in their search for housing, as this is identified as a really important need, especially for those who are coming for shorter stays or with families. And with regards to language, in our fall 2019 semester, Laurier International and the Department of Teaching and Learning have teamed up to create a new position that will involve students, staff, and student staff support to assist English as an additional language learners in their academic pursuits. So from presentations, group work, anything that you can think about that's academic related. So my personal thoughts are that there are many resources in our community that will positively enhance the experience of migrants in our society. I think we also do a great job at advertising what we can do for our newcomers. Where we can boost our efforts will be in finding innovative ways of getting newcomers to seek the support that they require without thinking, I can do this alone, or the fear of taking too much from the system, or not being qualified because of the immigration document that I signed and was sealed and delivered. It is then that we can play a larger role in building resilient communities in our migrant population. And just lastly, I would like to share some information about our sponsored refugees who also benefit from these resources that we have available. So since 1991, Laurier has sponsored 30 students who come from refugee camps through the Student Refugee Program, which is spearheaded by the World University Service of Canada, a global development organization that improves education, employment, and empowerment opportunities for youth, women, and refugees. The Student Refugee Program is one of its kind. It couples education with resettlement for those sponsored refugee students. Students arrive in Canada as permanent residents and receive funding to study at universities nationwide. Fortunately, our students come from countries of origin that have well-established communities in the KW region, and so these students immediately feel at home at Laurier and in this region. We were fortunate at Laurier to be able to financially support students for 48 months, whereas most other educational institutions provide the mandatory 12-month support sponsorship. All undergraduate students at Laurier contribute $4 a semester to make this happen. So to really speak to the topic of resilience, I hope that most of you are aware of the Ontario Government Student Choice Initiative that now affects Laurier's ability to confidently say that we have the necessary finances to continue sponsoring our students, as now all students have the choice to opt out of making this $4 a semester commitment. We even lost the opportunity to sponsor 3 new students, which we originally intended for fall 2019. Having to break this news to our current students brought different reactions. From the very resilient who said, well, our friends at other institutions only got 12 months, so we were happy to have as much as we received. To those who were flat out in tears, as the uncertainty of pursuing their degree roared its ugly head. The latter are the students we will now work with to build their resilience, encouraging them that they can still attain the goals despite this news. So I look forward to hearing from my co-panelists and you, as the members of the audience, for suggestions on how we can continue to build resilience in this particular group of students. Thank you.
Okay, I will talk more about our experience at the Kitchener-Waterloo Multicultural Centre. As I said before, we serve clients who are coming under permanent residency in different categories. We'll say refugee protected person that are coming through the government-sponsored refugee. We have those ones who are coming under private sponsor, that is different ways to sponsor, through a community group, through a church, or through a group of 5. There are also refugees as well. We have what is called the family sponsorship, where somebody will sponsor the partner or the children who are abroad. I mean, there is a different variety of ways that you can sponsor. And we have people who come here as skilled workers, but they already have permanent residency. We can support them better because through the federal government, we get that funding in order to support them. In the case of the Multicultural Center, but also YMCA, we have a partnership with the libraries in order to support people who are under permanent residency. But today, I think we are here to talk about those ones who are in different categories, that is more the vulnerable population who are under a temporary status, that we can include temporary workers, I will say visitors as well, and we have refugee claimants that for us has been, I think in the last year, a big challenge. But also I can mention that we have the increase of temporary workers who come to our office to get some, I will say not advice because we don't advise, but to get some information of how they can stay here. And we see a variety of temporary workers. We see high-skilled workers, and we see that they call low-skilled workers. In my personal opinion, I believe those ones who are high-skilled workers, they have better support and better chances to stay, because most of them, they will be working in a field that is required in Canada, and they will stay most of them will be able to apply after 1 year of being working in their field, and then they will apply under what is called express entry, which most of them, I will say, will be successful in applying. But we also have seen a number of international students that, even though that we know that universities support them, sometimes they have to us because we have a worker who speaks the language, but even though that they speak English, but they feel more comfortable in talking in the maternal language. And they have probably to ask some questions that will be more cultural related to, and they can identify with the worker, okay? And we have a challenge here because for those, even though that we provide services to temporary status, our funding is very, very limited in that regards. And now with the new government, it's very unfortunate that we lost very important part of the funding that was allocated to go what we call the vulnerable population, that will be LGBT community, refugee claimants, and those ones who are illegal as well. Because we need to admit as well, we have people who are illegal in this region, and how we can support them because they need to survive, and they need to build those resilience, and we as a settlement organization, we feel that is our responsibility to support them in the way that they will need. But it's difficult with the small funding that we have, and for those reasons, we need to be very creative, I will say it, and be a strategy in order to see how we can continue supporting them. And this is why when somebody comes as an international student, we refer them to the university. But even though, I mean, we listen to them and we see what can support them, and we refer them to different services. I mean, we don't allow anybody leaving our doors without being seen and heard. Because for us, it's very important that everybody feels welcome wherever is the status here. The other trend that we have seen is people who come in as visitors, and then they are engaged with somebody here, and I mean, they want to stay because of it is that relationship as a partner relationship, but it's a period that the person as well will stay with, we'll say, precarious status, because they can be as a visitor, but as a visitor, you don't have any right, you don't have access to healthcare, and the person gets pregnant, the things get complicated. Okay? But this is what we need to know, different resources in order to support those clients. I mean, we know that we have, for example, the midwife services that are free for people who are in vulnerable situation as well. But I will say that refugee claimant has been an important issue that we have been dealing with the new, with the state's situation there. We didn't, I think, get all the number of people that we thought that would be when trapped to power, but we still see a number of refugees. We were not specialized in refugee claimants, but since we were aware that Trump was taking power, we were preparing, and we hired a person who has a lot of expertise in refugee claimants, okay? Because it's very specialized process to support a person who is refugee claimant, the person who is doing the claiming in land, the person who's done the claim in the border. I mean, there are different issues that we need to deal with, but refugee claimants' challenge is that for a period of time, they will not have access to Ontario Works, that is the financial support that they can get. But also the shelter has been very difficult. I mean, housing is a crisis in this region, and shelters have not been able to, I mean, to comply with all the needs. That the demand is big with the spaces that they have. That has been, for us, a big challenge, and I think with Immigration Partnership and with other organizations, we are trying to see how this issue that I said is not only for newcomers, the housing crisis is for everybody in this region, how housing can become affordable for everybody as well. Right? Ontario Goals as well has been, we'll say, flexible in order to change a little bit rules in order to accommodate the needs of refugee claimants. We need to do a lot of lobbying and advocacy in order to change some of the regulations and policies as well. I will say the ones that at the end I think in regards workers who are under the lowest skill is it's very difficult for us to find a way that they can stay because most of them, they will not have the language skills, they will not have the field that is required in Canada, and most of them, they need to go back to the country in. And we have seen companies that are bringing temporary workers with, they have been told, the workers, that when they arrive in Canada and start working with them, they will be able to apply. They will sponsor them, or they will nominate them in order to stay here, but at the end, that promise is breaking. And then they are here with the families, and I mean, the families are already here, the families are settled, and I mean, they don't want to go back to the country. Some of them, I say, it's the ones that will become illegals at some point. And I think the other question is what is needed to foster resilience in this region. In my opinion, I think is to work in collaboration with all organizations that support. I will say that when somebody comes here, everybody is involved in the settlement. I mean, it's the region, it's childcare, it's our schools, university, college. I mean, it's everybody, in my opinion, should be surrounded by, through the newcomer who comes in this region. But I think, as you say, sometimes we are aware of the services that are in the region and how we can be more aware of the services in order to support the newcomers who are here. I think that is still lacking of information, and I think how we can support each other in order to support others, then will help in order to build resilience into the newcomers. Working with faith organization, I believe that is very important as well, but also with the companies who are bringing newcomers into the region, whatever it is high-skilled workers or low-skilled workers. I think this is something that is still lacking, and I want to see more that collaboration with employers that are bringing newcomers here, and we support them as well to understand what a newcomer is facing, but at the same time, a newcomer here. That's my dream. And our role as a multicultural center is to provide information and resources, accurate information and resources to those ones who come to our doors, because sometimes what has happened as well that they hear from friends, they hear from family members, but the information is not the right and the current information, and for that reason, they can make important mistakes that will have no positive outcomes in the future. For example, somebody comes as a visitor, they believe that because the visitor visa says that is valid for 5 years, they can stay in Canada 5 years without renewing a visa, which is not true. I mean, the person can stay only 6 months and then they need to renew it. But they have some consequences if they know about this situation. This is what is important for us to provide information and referral to services according to what is available in the region. Sometimes we feel that our hands are tied as well, because depends on the status of the person, we can refer to services or not. Okay? As I say, temporary workers, for example, they don't have a lot of support when they need to write a resume or to look for other options to stay here. if they are working for a specific company and they have problems with that company and they need to change to another one, there is not really the support on that one to support them here. And that part is lacking, even though that I feel that as a federal government is part of the policy to bring temporary workers, we should provide the support here. Because I feel that there is that responsibility when you invite somebody to come to your home, to your house, to provide with everything that they need. Okay? Yeah, I think what we have done as well in order to support, because I think in order to build resilience, I think information is important. And one way to do this one is that we have organized different group sessions, information on different things, finances, health, parenting. We were talking before the session about how important it is as well to have those sessions in order to understand what parenting means to be in a new society, to avoid further problems with children in the future. Language has been mentioned as well as one of the challenges for newcomers. We have a program that is one-on-one tutoring program as well to support newcomers. It's limited as well to those ones who are permanent residents, but we have some space in order to give to those ones who are not in that category. We have also a program that's called Connector for Success, that is support newcomers who have, we'll say, they are engineers, but they don't have any network here, because one of the issues that as a newcomers, we don't have the networking because everything was left home. No? And one way to build this one is to connect with somebody who is in the same field that will connect you with the others in order to see how you will find job in your field. Okay? This is just an examples of things that we have been able to offer at the office in order to support clients and that they will be successfully living in this region.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for sharing some of your perspectives on the topic of discussion tonight. I hear a lot of consistencies in the types of comments that you're making, regardless of the fact that I think you're working with often different groups of individuals who have moved into Waterloo region. And just before I open it up for questions, I think, it comes back to, there's a couple of important takeaways from me, from from looking from a community perspective, being aware of how immigration plays out in a community, and I think for Kitchener-Waterloo and probably many other countries across Canada to recognize that, what we think of when we think about immigration into Canada is changing. It's not just somebody who is arriving with a permanent status who will then likely transition to citizenship, but that, those temporary forms of migration are growing, and they are growing in our community and many communities across the country. That the many people who come in on a temporary status are transitioning to permanent residency. So that is growing increasingly as a permanent migration pathway into the country. That the intention to stay amongst temporary workers is high, and how do we acknowledge that in communities, and what are we doing to foster their ability to stay and be continuous members of our communities. And as we look at, kind of growth patterns in communities and, future development, what importance are we placing on all of the migrants who are in our communities? Hear a lot about similar types of challenges for people who are in the community, regardless of their status, and yet still fairly siloed responses to how we are supporting different categories of migration, even with, initiatives like the Immigration Partnership, which have existed for the last 10 years, and how are we going to continue to try to break down those silos and, kind of continue to build that collaboration at a community level. And I think you've heard kind of speaking to the need to try to demystify migration and normalize the notion of migration and what migration pathways look like. And yeah, anybody who enters our community may end up being a permanent resident here, and how do we help them in that process? And yeah, how do we reach across institutions and sectors and foster stronger and more holistic and resilient systemic responses in order to really be welcoming and foster retention for people who want to stay in our communities. Those are big things for me to take back, and I know you're working with them every day. I think I would open it up now to anybody who has questions for any of our panelists. There are 2 microphones on either side of the room. That's where people should go, right behind the first kind of block of seating. If you have a question, why don't you come up and speak into the microphone so that everybody can hear you.
Thank you for the panel. That was great, and appreciate the work that you are all doing in your communities. You spoke a lot, obviously, about building resilience among newcomers, but I wonder if you might say a little bit about how you're able to build resilience of your own organizations in very tough times, because it's not just the resilience of newcomers, it's actually the resilience of the especially nonprofit organizations that are doing all this great work.
Anybody like to take a stab at that first?
Oh, I could try. As I mentioned, I think academic institutions have been doing this for a very long time. We have always been focused on our students, and that has widened not only to our students, but to our faculty and our staff, and the visitors that come to our institutions, because they all are coming on a temporary status first and foremost. They don't come with permanent residency. They come with temporary status. And I think with that in mind, the institutions have always built in services to assist those temporary people, to help them navigate, to help them find their way once they're here. Because it is not just about studying, and it's not just about research or teaching. They have to live here. They have to find their footing in order to do well in those areas. So I think within academic institutions, we have, like I said, built a mini community to provide those services. First and foremost has always been our international student advisors. My role came as a call to arms basically 10 years ago. Like I said, I've been doing this for 15 years. 10 years ago, that was when it clicked in one of the provost's heads and said, oh, maybe we could provide the same service to our faculty that are in need, because guess what? 50% of our faculty that we hire are non-Canadian. They need those services just as much as our students do. But as those years went by, those services have grown. We're not just advising on their temporary status. We're advising on how to navigate and be part of our community here. Because I started this role as an onboarding specialist. That means I assisted people to help them find housing, to help get them to get to the area where they need to go to get health insurance, to get their driver's license. You know, all of those things kind of came out of all of this, and immigration was just a small part of it. So now my role is 100% immigration, but the other onboarding side of things are taken on by our Student Success Office, not just our international student advisors. So on the side for our faculty and staff, that's our human resources. They now have an onboarding system. So we have those kinds of things built in to help build that resilience, first and foremost within our mini community, so that they have a better footing when they go out to the wider community of Kitchener-Waterloo to find those services, because now they know what to ask for, so they can navigate through the services that we do have. And although it may be siloed, it's a matter of knowing how to ask for it as well, right? If they don't know what they're asking for, they don't know what services are out there. So by first starting within the university, we are giving them basically a roadmap to the Kitchener-Waterloo community as to what to look for.
I can answer as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So there's no surprise, again, the Ontario government and the effects on our educational institutions at the post-secondary level. There's an anticipated, 10% cut tuition, which now has the university, I think, scrambling to figure out what's going to happen next, what's going to happen in the fall. How are we going to retain staff? How are we going to have all the programs that we've already offered that we all think are necessary? And so I think this is where resilience really comes in, right? So everyone is coming together to figure out how do we keep this operation running. So there's going to be feedback from like the lower level staff like myself that goes up to senior administration. So it's good to see that we're coming together as an organization and taking advice from the different levels to make this happen. With the story that I gave about the student refugee program, so I received an email just before I left the office that the University of Ottawa, the local committee of the student refugee program, was successful in lobbying with their senior administration to make the student refugee program fee a mandatory fee. Well, guess what? All other Ontario universities now have an example to make. And so hopefully, with my sad story, hopefully it will turn into a success story. So we just needed one. Again, there were students who lobbied with senior administration, and they were successful. And again, it's an example. So we're going to use this, and I'm pretty sure that at all Ontario universities, we're going to be able to continue sponsoring our refugee students. Yes.
I would add something, as we are a non-profit organization. Our organization supported resilience by dialogue, being active and present in all culture and ethnic discussion to convey our voice to the leaders.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, the most important is to recognize that when somebody immigrate to Canada, they already have shown a lot of resilience, because moving into a new country is not so easy, independently what is your status. I think we probably need to change to build resistance in supporting or facilitate to continue the resilience of newcomers here, because they already have had a lot of resilience there. I will say it one or the other, everybody. But if somebody has been a refugee and overcome all lot of barriers, all challenges, when they are here, they have really big resilience. But I don't want to say that a high-skilled worker will not have as well. I think everybody has, and we need to recognize that important, and how we can support them and continue doing this one. I mean, as organization, I think this is how we see them as the owner of the process, wherever they are doing. We are just there working with them in order to accomplish what they want to accomplish.
Hi.
Yes. My question is directed at Laurier and University of Waterloo. This is great, talking about the resources available for newcomers and helping the newcomers to settle in and find their way and things like that. I'm wondering what resources and processes exist within the university to facilitate the institutions to be receptive of those newcomers, whether it's new faculty members, whether, in relation to their classrooms that they are going in to teach, to other faculty members, to committees. I guess it's sort of a diversity training with a focus on newcomers. Does that make sense? If there are programs within the university to make, to make people more receptive. And I'm not alleging people are not receptive. Thank you.
At the University of Waterloo, we don't have any formal diversity training. There is, I think, first and foremost, when you come to talk about new faculty, it's a very collective sort of recruitment process when we're looking at new faculty. Our departments, when they are looking to hire, they bring in the entire department as well as some of the grad students and undergrad students into the recruitment process. They sit in on talks given by the potential new candidate. They are there to kind of give feedback as well. So they have already started the process well before this candidate gets hired, well before they even come to Canada. So they are already aware of what these new faculty can bring. And it is very much that. It's not so much a diverse dichotomy as so much as they're looking at what can this new faculty member bring to our department? Is it their research, is it their teaching, or is it both? So I don't think it's so much diversity training that they're looking at, because we've already started that. I wouldn't call it training, but more an introduction at the very beginning when we start the recruitment process.
And so from Laurier's end, it's not something that we as Laurier International is directly involved with, but fortunately within our human resources department, there are now, there's I think the manager of equity, diversity and inclusion, I believe, who is part of the human resources, and also, I can't remember her title, but again, it's around diversity and inclusion. So what is happening now, we cannot necessarily reach out and offer services if we don't know who we have. So anytime there's a new permanent hire, there's a survey that goes out to collect information. So, if you want to identify as racialized or indigenous, or disability, LGBT, so you have that opportunity to now identify. So we're right now in the collection phase of this information. And then from there, we will go out and try to have those focus groups with those who identify and see the needs that these groups of people will have, and in order to have some programs or some trainings that they will need. So I attended a panel discussion yesterday on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so there was an assistant professor who was new to Laurier, and she spoke about her experience, and part of it, it's really hard to hear, but part of it was her saying that she had to change around her office hours because there were people who were coming in and looking at her, and she felt that she wasn't very welcome there. And so her own decision was to just try to change her hours so no one will know when she's in the office. I mean, these are things that should not exist. And so there should be some formalized training, faculty, amongst faculty, student to faculty, faculty to student. And I think, again, we're just in the collection phase and we'll be moving forward from there.
We can take one last question and then, yeah.
Hi, I have a question for Candace Stewart-Smith, and maybe if the other speakers can also speak to it. You said something about having services for international students that are suffering from maybe an international crisis like war at home. And I just wonder if you have any stories about that, if you have more to say about it, and if you do have stories, is it more stories of individual resilience, or do you find that they actually have system of supports to help each other in these situations?
Good question. So A lot of what we have seen, so maybe I'll talk about the student refugee program. Because the students come from the same camps, they tend to know each other. So for a situation like this that I have described, where the ones who are almost at the end, okay, they're going to be cut off of funding, but they're closer to the end compared to those who have just started. I think that there is a great support system amongst these. There are 7 students at the Waterloo campus and 2 at the Brantford campus. And so the ones who have already been here have navigated the system, right? They've applied for OSAP. Mind you, OSAP might be changing. And they've found jobs to help supplement their income. These are also students that would send money home, right? They've come out of the camps, they've come from home, they're the ones that their families are looking to for financial support. And so with these group of students, again, it's a good support system for that group. With regards to what we saw, for example, students in financial crisis, I would reflect on Nigeria as a country. We have a lot of students from Nigeria. And at one point, it was really challenging to get money out of the country in big chunks. So we worked with our registrar's office. The students would be able to continue registering for classes. So there would be a hold on their account, but they would be able to release the hold so that they can add classes and continue going. Well, that crisis kind of got taken care of. It's not great, but it's a little bit better. But at the same time, the currency actually devalued, I think, 3 times. So what they would have, the money that they would have gotten to cover tuition, now they only have one third of that. So it was really hard for those students who actually didn't have the money anymore. Some students, it was fine, like their parents were still able to send them the money that they needed, even though the currency devalued, but there were some of them who actually started to struggle. So they started to fly under the radar until the registrar's office kind of caught up as to what was happening. And so we had to work with those students to help them get through their education and to complete their degree. So with that said, because it was individual students coming to see us, because I know the students who now started who are facing those challenges, I worked with them. I said, would you mind, worked with the upper year students, would you mind, having a conversation with students who have just come to explain your experience and that it's possible, you will make it, right? And so as groups of students would get together, but based on my, bringing them together. So nothing that was organic. So those are just 2 examples, again, from the individual side, but also the great support system of the student refugee program.
Anybody else? Okay. I think then I think we're out of time for the night. I would just like to say a quick thanks to... Oh, sorry.
No, question.
A quick, okay, one quick one, and then we're going to wrap up.
Thank you so much for this panel. I just had a quick question about trailing spouses. And this is a conversation I'd begun with Fran at one point. So it's wonderful that spouses of high-skilled workers and international students are given an open work permit to come to Canada. However, we're starting to uncover in some of our research perhaps some gaps in terms of what supports they can access. And so I wonder what's available at University of Waterloo, and if anybody else wanted to speak to that as well.
Waterloo specifically? For trailing spouses, it all just depends on whether or not they have an affiliation within the university. If they don't, then I'm still happy to advise and provide guidance, providing that you are introduced first and foremost by the person you have the open work permit from within the university. So these kinds of services that I do provide have become kind of opened up, because I do know that it's a changing landscape out there. Because trailing spouses just don't have that ability to access certain services outside of the institution, because they just don't have yet that job. They don't have a community connection, to network, to find those kinds of services. So I do know that if you do have a trailing spouse or you are a trailing spouse, introduce yourself through your partner that's with the university, and I'm happy to help out. And I've done that for both faculty members, staff members, international students, and visitors that are here on temporary resident visas that are visiting for short term. So all of these kinds of things, although it takes a lot of time, they're well spent time. Okay, because you guys get to stay.
Did you want to respond as well, Candace? Or?
No, it's okay. No,
No?
we can other time.
All right.
If you want to come to ask me after, that's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so I think we'll draw the panel to a close. Thank you to all of you for sharing your experiences with us tonight. And Valerie, can I invite you up for some closing remarks?
I stand between you and the end of the day. First, I want to thank all of the panelists. The stories you've told, the issues you've discussed really illustrate one of the main motivations for the partnership that we've developed, which is very much that people are coming to Canada with status that we never imagined, hoping to stay in some cases, finding they want to stay in other cases, and ending up needing to stay in other cases, as some of these international students do. And yet most of our understanding of settlement is based on the idea that everybody arrives with permanent residence status. This is also an idea that permeates the policy landscape. Almost all policy, and it's interesting to hear the two university representatives, because they in fact are so involved with people who arrive without permanent residence. But the policy landscape is permeated by the idea that if you are going to get services, you're going to be permanent first. And as we've heard, this is a real issue. I also think what you've said illustrates how complicated settlement has become. And as I mentioned earlier today, even IRCC, the federal department, is beginning to realize that settlement is not a linear process, that it is very dynamic, and it doesn't just depend on your occupation, education, and language abilities. And there's growing evidence, in fact, that where you settle and when you settle matters. And Kitchener-Waterloo is a fascinating region because there is this history here of helping refugees, of building collaboration among institutions. And the reason I mention that is that the small literature we have on social resilience, on the way that institutions help people develop the strategies and the resources to overcome challenges, and that help institutions themselves overcome challenges. And I've been looking madly at the provincial budget, which is very bad news for Ontario universities, for those of you who haven't read the news yet. That social resilience is based on collaboration among institutions with different mandates, among institutions of different sizes, but that the collaboration includes fairly stably funded institutions like universities, non-profits like the one that Ana Luz Martinez is involved with, as well as Rana's non-profit, community-based organization. And what unites those collaborations is a shared set of values. And I think what we've heard tonight, with all of the different perspectives and ideas, is a shared set of values that no matter how you come to Canada, you deserve support. And that this is a group of organizations that is trying to figure out in a very rapidly shifting landscape, and one that I think John Shields was trying to point out is going to become tougher in the next few years, how they can help all of these newcomers and at the same time, in this landscape, maintain their own resilience as organizations so they can continue to provide those services and supports. And I want to thank all of them for giving us ideas about how we need to think about resilience, not as a static quality, but as a quality that both people and institutions can develop. Thank you very, very much. And the drinks are outside.